Good morning. I'm Elizabeth Davis Russell, a member of this congregation since 1989, probably before some of you were born. I would like to give a special welcome and recognize members of Iota Omega of Alpha Kappa Alpha, Dr. Della Cava, Ms. Lisa Haynes Scott, and Brianna Cava. Thank you for coming to support me. The words of the scripture just read are as relevant today as they were when written. God has given us gifts, uniquely ours, and how we use them is a challenge each of us must confront. As Spencer read, if you're a teacher, teach. If you're a leader, lead with care. And I think so often we think that we must measure up to what someone is doing. Well, God may have given that person different gifts from what you have. So it is for each of us to discern what gifts God has given us and utilize those in ways that are uplifting to others. The subject of my message this morning discerned what her unique gifts were. She declared, I have a purpose, I have a mission, and I carried it out on the world stage, end quote. She goes on to say, quote, as my life unfolded, I saw a pattern. My value system formed and was strengthened through pain and sacrifice, not through talking the talk, but by walking the walk of fire, end quote. I now ask each of you to engage in some introspection. What is your purpose? What is your mission? Are you ready to not only talk the talk, but walk the walk? And how far and under what circumstances? The person about whom I'm speaking is Coretta Scott King, who saw herself not as a crystal figurine, fragile and fearful, but, quote, as the one who was not missing in action in the midst of crisis, end quote. Coretta begins her memoir with these words, quote, there is a Mrs. King, there's also Coretta. How one became detached from the other remains a mystery to me. Most people who follow my career from afar, or even given me a second thought, know me as Mrs. King, wife of, the widow of, the mother of, the leader of. Makes me sound like the attachments that come with my vacuum cleaner. In one sense, I don't mind that at all. I'm proud to have been a wife, a single parent, and a leader. but I am more than a label. I'm also Coretta. Isn't it time you know the integrated, holistic woman, one spirit, one soul, one destiny, end quote. In the limited time I have, I invite you to take a journey with me as we take a glimpse into the life, love, and legacy of Coretta. This woman who rose to international fame, chatted with presidents, prime ministers, kings and queens, princesses, the Dalai Lama, won many international awards, among which was San Valentino, which means universal love, becoming the first Black and non-Italian to receive this award. She was the first woman to preach a statutory service at St. Paul's Cathedral in London, England, and was also given the Nehru Award. Coretta was born to humble beginnings in Alabama, to a father who was independent and resilient, characteristics which very much were evident in his daughter, Coretta, and she had a very nurturing mother. Sitting in the dark quiet of Marion, Alabama night, the child Coretta dreamed of something on the other side of the moon. Propelled by the meanness and hate she saw in and experienced from whites, she knew that she wanted to change that. Her yearning for kindness led her to be part of whatever would bring peace, love, and fairness to wherever she found herself. Her life and work with her husband brought her closer to the dream of the beloved community. Coretta wanted to become a concert singer, so she obtained her master's degree in music. Being a career woman was extremely important to her. She became a concert singer. However, when she met Martin and married him, had children, and became involved in the civil rights movement, she had the personal dilemma of every working woman, leading her to ask the question, quote, what happens when you are expected to be superwoman, to perform a dozen conflicting tasks at the same time, end quote. Mrs. King tried to balance her concert career with motherhood and responsibilities as a wife and chief confidant of an international figure, while she tried to address global issues of diplomacy and international peace through such efforts as being a woman Strike for Peace delegate to Switzerland. Further evidence of her adaptation included giving freedom concerts, which were a combination of dramatic storytelling about the movement coupled with her singing. This became a lucrative way to raise funds for the movement. She also saw this as bringing the arts to change hearts and minds. And I guess that's something you can relate to, Egypt. Coretta was no stranger to crises and trauma. Her family experienced acts of intimidation from the Ku Klux Klan, and at age 15, She and her sister Edith came home from school one day to find their house burned to the ground. Anticipating their tears, Coretta reports that her father turned to them and said, quote, "No time for tears," end quote, and then went on to rebuild their home and his business, which had also been burned to the ground. So was she built for that? Yes, she was. This early conditioning enabled her to function during many crises. Her modus operandi was to seek solution during any crisis. She discovered that she became stronger in crises, saying that her mind kicks into high speed and starts racing towards solutions. She learned that even amid terror, there is always a way out. I think that's a lesson for us today, that no matter what we are experiencing, there is a way out. And believed in the gospel song she had been taught early in her life. Quote, "God will make a way out of no way." God will make a way out of no way. We can see from this that Coretta's belief in God was very strong, as she also manifested her belief in the power of prayer. She stated when she didn't pray, things went badly. But when she prayed, she could see clearly. Perhaps a trauma that brought home to her the consequences of her activism was the bombing of their home during the Montgomery bus boycott. Mrs. King said that the boycott had become personal for her very quickly. Quote, "It burned in my mind the price I might have to pay for refusing to bow down to a system that has insisted upon reducing us to less than human." And there's so many of us in this society today who feel that this system is reducing us to less than human. She goes on to state, and I quote, "The knowledge that I could be killed along with the people I loved had to settle within me," end quote. Coretta, through her identification with suffering people around the world, regardless of their color, declared herself a human rights activist, dedicating herself to seeking truth, equality, fairness, and justice. We know today that those are words that have been erased or are being erased out of certain places. She declared that she had a divine calling on her life, a charge, a challenge to serve not just Black people, but all oppressed mankind. I think sometimes we become so focused on our own little group that we neglect to see the bigger picture. And Coretta gives us a lesson here that while we may care dearly for our own, that there is enough love and enough caring about the rest of oppressed people. Coretta was an activist long before she met Dr. King. See, and that is a fact that people don't know about Coretta. When she was in the 8th grade, Bayard Rustin made a speech to her class about India and Gandhi. Now, some of you may not know about Bayard Rustin. I think lately there was a film made about him and his activism. But his work was published much publicized because he was a gay man. And so tolerance was not the rule of the day. Later, during her college days in Ohio, Bear Rustin made a speech, and that, coupled with an independent course she took, piqued her interest in the effectiveness of nonviolence. So when she met Martin Luther King Jr., their interests matched. Coretta, however, was also influenced by the Quakers and became an early opponent to the war in Vietnam. It was also at Antioch that she was introduced to the concept of the beloved community, and which she later enhanced and refined to what we have today. Throughout her life, Coretta went on to advocate for many causes, including labor unions, women's rights, gay rights, advocating for divestiture in South Africa, and holding prayer meetings in South Africa where it was illegal to bring people of different races together. Now, I may sound political here, but one of the driving forces in this administration is someone who came from that system in South Africa. Advocating for the untouchables while visiting in India and using her appointment as a special delegate at the UN to call attention to several issues, sometimes taking positions that challenge our government's official position. That didn't sit well. That brought the ire of two presidents upon her. She was placed on President Nixon's enemies list, and President Reagan banned her from speaking on the Voice of America. And you know, VOA was very important in taking messages across the world. A strong champion of women, she strongly believed that women's essence and presence should shine rather than be buried or shunned to the sidelines. An example of this strong commitment is seen in her organization of Women Mobilized for Change, which sent Mayor of Chicago, a telegram advocating for women's rights. Now, many of you may not know about Daley, you may be too young, but in my opinion, he was a tyrant. A Democrat, but a tyrant. Another example, when Coretta was marrying her husband, she asked that the traditional language in the marriage vows about, quote, obeying and submitting to my husband be deleted from the wedding vows because it made her feel too much like an indentured servant. And how many people said, I promise to obey and serve till death gets me. When Coretta was introduced to Martin, it was not love at first sight for her, but she declared that after their first date, he declared rather, after their first date, that she possessed all the traits he was looking for in a wife. As she continued to date him, she saw the essence of the man, and he became the love of her life. She introduces a little humor there, said when she first saw him, she thought, he's so short. As a wife, Coretta saw herself as her husband's collaborator, confidant, supporter, coach, and documentarian. She would give him ideas for his speeches, read and edit them. On one occasion, she said to her husband, quote, "People all over the nation have been so aroused by the impact of Birmingham, you should call a massive march on Washington to further dramatize the need for legislation to completely integrate Black people into American society. I believe that 100,000 people will come to the nation's capital at your invitation," end quote. Now, history does not give her credit for that idea. Instead, it was the men of the day who got the credit for that. As history reveals, the march exceeded their expectations. Mrs. King reported that there was no seat reserved for her on this platform. And after the march, the invitation to the White House to speak with the president did not include her. She had to bid her husband goodbye at the gates of the White House. So that says something about how the women who worked so hard in this movement were not recognized and were treated. These incidents heightened the reality that for her and other prominent Black women who worked hard for the movement were relegated to the background. As her husband's confidant, he would confide in her, and she stated that because he had such a strict sense of guilt, he would, quote, confess, end quote, whatever transgression he had committed, no matter how small, to her. So when Edgar Hoover started the rumor that King was having an affair directed at her, she knew that that was not true because Martin confessed no matter what he did to her. As his ardent supporter, when he experienced bouts of depression, and that's something we don't know about Dr. King, but probably it's a condition that afflicts many leaders that we have. She comforted and encouraged him. As his documentarian, she fought to have his words documented and guarded his intellectual property from exploitation. These were battles she had to wage with some prominent media and institutions, including Boston University. As his widow, Mrs. King saw the preservation of her husband's work as her second love to her children. She described the founding of the King Center as the birth of her fifth child. She also fought tirelessly to get her husband's birthday as a national holiday. It took 15 years and many allies working with her to finally bring that to fruition. As a mother, Coretta wanted to keep her children safe. And as mothers, you know that. To shelter them from the bloodshed of Selma and other protests and help them see that what their father was doing was helping to make things better for others. Upon her husband's death, she struggled with how to explain to their young children that their father would no longer be with them. She now saw her children as her first love and wanted them to live a normal life. So was she built for that? Yes, she was. Dr. Bernice King, the King's youngest child, describes her mother as her mentor, whom she saw as, quote, spiritually a matched blend of character, personality, commitment, and organization, able to manage the most complex civil and human rights problems while at the same time paying attention to the personal needs of others. A true sign that she was built for that. Quote, she was tough and tender, the epitome of unselfishness, caring, considerate, and giving. In conclusion, I leave you with the words of Dr. Barbara Reynolds, who said of Coretta Scott King, quote, beyond a shadow of a doubt, she was a great American hero who was willing at any time and over the long haul to give her life to set others free. So as I leave you, I'd ask, what is your mission? Are you built for whatever comes your way? Are you willing to walk the walk? And if you're willing to do so, under what circumstances are you willing? Thank you.